All right, everybody, you can see here the contents you're going to need to set up your elevator. Here's an exploded view of what's in your package, and we'll get to setting up your elevator. So first thing you're gonna do is set the servo in. You want to make sure that you're not missing that little groove for your wire there on the right hand side. It's important that you get your servo wire in that right in that hole so it doesn't pinch your servo. As you can see, the holes are pre-drilled. So we'll go ahead and take the elevator servo that we use. That's the right elevator. So remember, we set up our servos in video number 1. So we're going to make sure we use the elevator servo, which is the right side servo. So as I get this arm off of here, we'll go ahead and get this servo mounted in. So a little bit tricky. It is tight. You just got to sort of wiggle it in. You want to make sure you use your grommets and your spacers like you see here. Make sure that you put the wire side, that you sort of cock the servo and put the wire side in first, making sure you get the wire in that groove that I showed you just a minute ago. That's going to be really important. And then just wiggle it in there, and once it's down in flush and nothing's pinched, as you can see here, it takes a little bit of finesse, and get that set, make sure that wire's free. And then this is where you'll put your servo arm. So your servo arm will just go right in there, and then you'll bolt that on, and you'll see that in a minute. So now let's do the tricky part of putting your screws in there. There's 100 different ways to do this. Some people just put it on the end. Hemostats work really well. You just grab the screw here and then put your wrench in there and screw it in that way. That helps. Everybody's got a different way to do that. But the holes are pre-drilled, so you don't have to do any of that there. Just go ahead and get the servo snugged in tight, and as soon as we get this started here, we'll get through quickly through putting all 4 of the servos in, all 4 of the servo screws. So all right, well, sped up the video there for you, make it a little bit quicker, but once we get these servos down tight, and again, it's really important to remember you don't pinch that servo wire. So you got to be careful as you're doing this that you don't get that pinch. But there you go, the servo's mounted. And now, well, we're going to go ahead and plug in the servo into the receiver. You want that servo to be back at that 0 mark where we sub-trimmed it 90 degrees to the body. So as you can see in your radio, you turn your radio on, and then you'll get that servo arm on there. Get it on there tight, and then we'll move you can see there on the one travel it hits the edge. So sometimes you just got to go, well, first before you do that, let's put the servo screw on, the servo arm screw. You don't want to end up forgetting that. So we'll get that locked in tight because we already know we got our 90 degrees set, and then we'll make sure that there's travel room. Now remember, if you're going to set up the plane for 3D, you're going to probably have some pretty high rates, 120, 130 ATVs, and then you'll dial down the different rates with your endpoints. But so as we're putting the servo arm on, there's a little pinch bolt on the arms that I'm using, a little spot on pinch bolt. You want to make sure you put a little blue Loctite on that, and then lock that down. But as going back to the 3D setup, if you're setting it up for 3D flight, you might have to open up that servo slot just a little bit longer. And you'll see that once I get this locked down here, you'll see that we'll open that servo hole up just a little bit longer, because let's plug this back in, and then here's where you can see right now I have my endpoint set at 145, trying to get the max resolution, but we're just hitting just a little bit on that wood. So we're going to go ahead, take a Dremel tool with just the small circular sanding disc, and we're just going to sand that slot just a little bit longer, maybe about a little 2/16 of an inch. We're just going to extend that slot, So I'll just sand that, and then we're gonna check it again, make sure it doesn't hit, and then looks like we got to go just a little bit more. You don't want that servo arm crushing the sheeting on your thing. So it's not hurting anything to make that slot just a tiny bit longer. It's better safe than sorry. I'll just go ahead and trim off that excess monocoat or ultra coat, and it's not hurting anything to make that a little bit longer. And now you're free and clear on both sides at 140 and 145 and 145 on your endpoints. Now you're going to dial that down, and here you're going to see we'll go ahead and install the control horns. Here's the control horns in your accessory kit. So just lightly find the slots with your fingers, and take a sharp hobby knife and cut them out. I don't go too much into cutting them out because we're going to cut a whole square out when we use the base, so I'll show you that. But here I'm just pre-fitting them in, making sure they fit okay. You know, there's no glue in that slot from the factory or anything like that, keeping it from going in where you might have to sand in there or file a little bit. But these fit really good. They're going to fit tight with some pressure. There's a little shoulder on that control horn. You want to make sure that that's all the way down. So here's the base, and the base, we'll put 2 of these in, if I can get them in, and then we'll fit that in. And then this is where, once we get them fit down, that we'll cut around that, we'll cut the covering around that little base. So once I get these in, just go ahead and grab your pen, and I like to just trace around that base, and then use a sharp hobby knife, pull that back out, use a sharp hobby knife to just cut that out. And it's important you use a sharp knife because you don't want to really dig in and cut the sheeting here. You want to maintain as much integrity as you can in that area. So we'll just peel this covering out of here once we get it. There we go, just peel it out. Now that leaves us a good gluing, bonding surface, so the base of that will bond right to that bare wood. Now what you want to do is you want to sand just the gluing surfaces. So you want to make sure you rough up that surface. Now that's the same with every one. So and then here you see the links. There's 2 different types of link. One goes to the control link, and then this one goes to the servo arm. Just make sure that you use the right one. It's sort of hard to mix them up, but you never know. And what I like to do before I glue my control horns, and I've said this in the wing video and the rudder video where it doesn't matter, I like to just screw my control horn together with that link in there. That keeps everything square. And sometimes if you don't do that and you got one of them leaning out, you might put some undue binding or pressure in there if it's glued crooked, or the hole isn't glued straight to the other one because it's up a little. So this is an important step. Just lightly put the link in there prior to gluing it in. So we'll get this all set, all square. Make sure that shoulder's pushed all the way down. And then now we're going to go ahead and use some 30-minute epoxy and get this glued up. I like to use 30-minute epoxy because it's not quite as brittle as the 5-minute epoxy, and it's important here so we'll just mix this up here and make sure you have, I like to have like some Q-tips, rubbing alcohol, and a rag handy while you're doing this, so you could use alcohol to wipe up the excess. But I take this little carbon rod that fits right down in those slots, and I get the epoxy all the way down in those slots. I'm pretty liberal with it. You want to get as much bonding here at this point. You don't want any failures in the air. So I'll get the epoxy on this, and then I'll take the link and I'll get it all over. Make sure I'm pretty liberal with it. Coat all the different sides that I've sanded in the base, making sure to get it, pretty liberal on there. And I know this is sort of a repeat for a lot of guys, but for those of you doing your first model, this is an important step, making sure that you get this glued down. Now, some people don't even use epoxy here. Some people use Gorilla Glue, which is another really strong glue to use. So, all right, there, we're all coated, and we're gonna just go ahead and we're gonna get that down flush, and the epoxy is gonna squeeze out. I just take a Q-tip with a little rubbing alcohol on it and sort of squeegee off the excess epoxy there. And this helps you from getting epoxy all over your covering and your finish. Then I just take this alcohol towel and just sort of clean up around it. Make sure that that's all nice and clean, and then get that down tight. Make sure you're all wiped up here. You want your model to look good as well as fly good. So there you go. Make sure that shoulder's all the way down, and then you just do the same thing on the other side. And the nice thing about using 30-minute epoxy is you can glue these at the same time. So try to speed this up for you because you don't need to see it twice, but make sure we glue this other side, and then we'll set that aside I'll set it aside for 24 hours. You really want that epoxy to set up. You don't want to put any undue pressure on it or anything like that. Let it set up for a good 24 hours. Come back to it to the next day, and then that way you won't have any problems. So here we are the next day, and we're going to go ahead and set up the links. So here I'm threading the links into the supplied in your bag, your turnbuckle. So you've seen I put a little bit of oil on that link. When you're threading the link onto your turnbuckle, you're actually cutting threads into the link. So I like to just put a little bit of oil on there to help that. The links are thread oppositely. So one link threads right, the other link threads left. So if you're trying to screw it on and it's not going, it's because you're screwing it the wrong way. So you just got to make sure you get that right. A little 5/32 wrench works great on your turnbuckles, and we'll get these sort of close, and we'll measure that out. So I'll just put the one side in, obviously the side that goes to the control link. And it's easy on the elevator because you can just bolt it in to the control link and then bolt it to the servo. But first I'm going to go ahead and get my radio on again, and you can see my radio's going. Got my endpoint set. So we'll just go ahead and set this up. I like to get the link close. I mean, you could just bolt it on and then use your wrench to adjust the turnbuckle, but it's nice to get that even. So here we're going to screw it on. The washer goes on top of the link, and then you'll screw it through the servo arm, and then on the other side, that the screws that are supplied are long enough for a nylock nut. So some people may tell you, and then same thing on the other side, you put the washer on the bolt side, not the nylock side, not the nylock nut side. So but there is actually in this accessory bag, there's enough to put it on both sides on the control link, which that's nice. So we'll get this locked in here. And again, on the servo arm side, even though the servo arm's threaded, I like to tighten the servo arm up and then put the bolt on the other side. So here what I'm doing is just making sure that the counterbalance is even So we're going to do a little bit of adjustment, make sure the counterbalance is even with the stab there. Again, this is a rough setup right now. Once everything's bolted onto the plane, we're going to go into that fine setup, setting your dual rates and your endpoint and your degrees of travel and all that stuff. So for now, we're just getting that set up. And, you know, so we got travel, full travel in both ways, actually a little bit more. So it's hitting on both sides right now, but we're still lining that counterbalance up with the stab. That's where you want that neutral position to be. So and then you also want to arrange those links so they're perfectly, you know, square to each other. There's no binding or anything in the link setup, but as you can see here, full travel one way, full travel the other way. And that's with our endpoints on our radio at 145, 145. But I'm going to go ahead, go into my endpoints right now since it's hitting, and when it hits, the servo's binding a little bit. So you can hear that buzzing of the servo. I'm just going to go in for now and turn it down to 135, 135. That'll keep it from binding, and then when we get to the setup phase, we'll match the two elevators to make sure that they travel the same exact amount on both sides. So we'll turn this down 135, 135. All right, so now that it's turned down to 135, 135, we don't have that binding in where the elevator's bottoming out on the travel. So just go ahead and unplug that, and then we got to go back to the servo arm here, and we got to make sure that the servo arm is all locked in, ready to go, so we don't forget that step. I use blue Loctite to going to the servo arm. The servo arm's threaded, even though on the other side I'm going to use a nylock nut. I like my stuff to not come apart, especially gas planes that tend to vibrate a little bit more and have a little bit more things. And here's that nylock nut. Excuse me. And we'll get that tightened on the other side. And then that's pretty much it. Then you repeat that exact same procedure on the on your left elevator half using the aux4 servo that we set up, and you'll be all set and ready to go to the setup phase once they're installed. Okay, so stay tuned for video number 4, which is rudder servo installation.